Well, hey, I am extremely excited about this series. If you have been with Awaken from the very beginning, I have done multiple parables series before, but we're going on about 10 years ago. Some of the parables that I will talk about, I kind of mapped out where I want to take it, the parables that I want to look at. I spoke on 10 years ago, 2014. I've had new insights since then. And I said, let's go and rework those parable sermons. Because recently, I gave two sermons about parables. We talked about the widow and the judge, and then the parable known as the parable of the gracious landowner. I had so much fun with these parables, I forgot how deep these parables went, how much they caused me to think and to reflect and question about who God is and what it means to live in the way of Jesus. I thought, let's just dive into parables for the summer. And that's what we are going to do this morning. Now, if you're new to this, a quick overview of parables. Parable means alongside, means next to. This would have been a common teaching technique. This was a very common teaching technique of Jesus. If you read through the Gospels, you will discover that Jesus taught parable after parable. In a parable, the teacher would use a very well-known and everyday object, something that you were all familiar with. Like, hey, there was a woman who was driving in their car. All the things that we have come to know and find familiar in our world. So obviously we have to go back 2,000 years because the first century is a little different than the 21st century. So in order to understand the parable, we'll have to enter into the first century and look at things that were commonplace in the first century. But the teacher would use these common everyday items, stories, objects, and then there would be some sort of a spin on this. The whole point of the parable was to use something familiar, but then pull the rug out from under you in order to reveal deeper truths. There's a way in which the world was run at the time. You had the Roman Empire that was in power. Everyone knew what it meant for the emperor to be in charge, for the Roman Empire to be the sole authority of the world. Jesus goes and tells these parables, and he offers his listeners, his audience, a different way to look at things. And essentially what Jesus was trying to do, he was trying to offer a picture of who God is, the character of God, the nature of God, what God is like. Because I don't know if you have discovered this, but oftentimes we run across some toxic views of God. Sometimes we have misunderstandings about God. We have the best intentions, but we're human, we're limited, we're fallible. Jesus comes because he wants to show the people. He wants to reveal to all of us the true nature of God. You've heard this about God. Well, let me give you a little spin on that and show you sort of the next level or the next layer of the onion to peel off so that we can have a deeper understanding of God and ultimately what Jesus wanted his listeners, his audience, us 2,000 years later to do was to live life in a way as if we were living under God's rule. First century, you were living under the emperor's rule, the Roman rule. There was a certain way in which that world worked, and Jesus is offering his listeners a different way to live and to move and to make meaning in the world. And one of the brilliant things about parables is they don't give easy answers. You are forced to wrestle with the implications of the parables and the teaching of Jesus. You would listen to it, and then you would walk away scratching your head wondering, what did I just hear? And then you'd be driving around on your tractor kind of putting some of the pieces together, trying to figure out, okay, how do I now go and live this out? So a parable isn't easily understood, and I think sometimes with parables, we can look at them at a certain base level, and then 10 years later, you peel another layer back and you realize, whoa, this thing is deeper than I originally thought. So that's what I want to do here over the next, 2.5 months that we have together through hopefully not too hot of a summer. Now, this morning, I have titled this sermon, The Divine Tinker. Now, I came up with about 4 or 5 different titles. Finally, this is the one that I landed on. And I think I had about 4 or 5 different ones on that tractor yesterday. Okay, which one do I go with? Now, we're going to start here in Luke 15. And in Luke 15, we have a collection of parables. There's the parable of the lost sheep. There's the parable of the lost coin. There's the parable of the lost son, which I've been told we can't talk about any longer. Running joke from community group, whenever we have a guest speaker, the guest speaker either comes with parable of the prodigal son or parable of the good Samaritan. And so we've all decided together, okay, let's put those on hold for a couple of years. So in Luke 15, where we'll find ourselves this morning, parable of the lost sheep. Now, I knew it was Father's Day, and I thought, why don't we give a sermon about what God is like, what God as Father is like. But here's what's really interesting. We're not going to talk about this parable right now, but maybe I should have done this parable for Mother's Day. If you go down to the next one, the lost coin, God, we see the feminine nature of God. In the lost sheep, you have a shepherd who's a male, who's doing the seeking, who's the God figure. In the lost coin, there's a woman who's lost a coin. Now she's the one doing the seeking. So right side by side, we have the masculine nature of God, and then we have the feminine nature of God. Side note, whole other sermon, not going there this morning. I found it interesting as I was putting this here together. So here's the setup for the parable in Luke 15. Now, the tax collectors and the sinners, in other words, the non-religious folk, they were all gathering around to hear Jesus. They're sitting at a table at Chuck E. Cheese. They're sharing a meal together. But the Pharisees, the good religious folk, the teachers of the law, they muttered. They're standing in the background. They're not sitting at the table. Jesus is sitting down. You have the non-religious folk who are sitting, sharing pizza with him. And then sort of in the background, you have the religious leaders who are muttering, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." They are not too pleased about who Jesus is sharing a meal with. Ancient world, if you're sharing a meal with someone, there was a level of acceptance. You were fully accepting the people you were sharing a meal with into your community. The religious leaders don't like this because by Jesus sharing a meal with the people who didn't go to church, the non-religious folk, Jesus was essentially accepting them into his life. The religious leaders do not like this. Then Jesus told them this parable. Suppose one of you, and he would have told this to everyone who was listening, the people at the table with him, but also all the other people who are muttering in the background. He would have cleared his throat, spoken up a little bit so that everyone could hear these collections of parables. Jesus told them this parable. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. Then he calls his friends, calls his neighbors together and says, "Block party, rejoice with me. I have found my lost sheep." Now I tell you, in the same way, there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent. Okay, here's what we're going to do this morning with this parable. I am going to show how this parable has 3 movements to it. There's 3 portions of the parable, 3 movements that we will look at. My inspiration for these 3 movements, for understanding this parable, want to know where it comes from? Anyone want to guess? You'll never guess. The Tinkerbell movie. I had another thought yesterday. I have used cartoons for sermons, a couple of sermons over the past couple of months. If I were 20 years from now looking back on my collection of sermons and different seasons of life that I'm in, this would clearly be the season of life with young kids. I don't know when's the last time. Oh, I did use a live action movie recently as well, but the majority, kids movies, kids cartoons. If you've never seen this movie, can I just tell you, I saw this movie probably about 1.5 years ago. it has stayed with me. The truths that are communicated in this movie are so profound that I know, I sound crazy. Go home and watch it. It's Disney Plus. Go to the library and get it. Whatever you need to do. My goodness. I was going to show 3 video clips. Unfortunately, Disney Plus actually blocked out the video from showing, so I have 2 of them. I'll have to explain the first one for you. But Tinkerbell is the parable of the lost sheep in a nutshell. I mean, it really is. Now, Tinkerbell, the whole movie, the setup of the movie is she's this fairy, and she finds out in the beginning of the movie that she is designated a tinker. And there's different designations for fairies. Fairies have different roles, different things that they'll go and do. So Miss Bell is a tinker, hence Tinkerbell. A tinker is someone who makes things, who fixes things, who puts things together for a purpose. Hence the title, The Divine Tinker. Now you see where it's coming from? Now, here are the 3 movements. First, the shepherd searches for and finds the lost sheep. Second, there is the religious response. And then third, we have restoration and renewal of the lost sheep. Movement 1. The shepherd searches for and finds the lost sheep. There are 4 things to note about the first movement. Number 1, the shepherd is aware 1 sheep is missing. You have 100 sheep. 1 is missing. If you're looking out over your flock of sheep, you're just looking, you think you would miss 1 out of 100? If you just quick glance, like, they look all here. All right, I can go to bed. We're good to go. This is a shepherd who pays attention to every single sheep. Every single one. The shepherd counts them. He marks them. He is paying attention to notice, oh my goodness, I'm missing a sheep. What this tells us is that every single life matters. In these parables, there is typically a God figure. When Jesus offers this parable of the lost sheep, the shepherd is the God figure. Right in the beginning of this parable, the first movement of the parable, we come to discover what we find out about God is that God sees. God notices. God pays attention to your life, to what you're going through. God sees and notices what every person is going through. And it doesn't stop there. The shepherd's not like, oh, I'm missing 1. Too bad. At least I got 99 more. No. The shepherd, God, is moved by compassion, by our struggles, our hardships, our sin, the messes that we get ourselves in. God is moved by compassion by our loneliness, the times when we feel alone, by our brokenness, by the harmful, destructive situations that we find ourselves in. The shepherd doesn't question why is the sheep lost. The shepherd says, 1 is missing. I'm going to go rescue it. So the first thing to note about this parable is God sees, notices, pays attention, and is moved by compassion for you and what you are going through. It does not matter at all how the shepherd has wandered away from home. Doesn't matter. If someone came and stole the sheep and took it away, if the sheep went and got itself lost on its own, it doesn't matter. The shepherd doesn't care. The only thing the shepherd cares about is restoring, rescuing this lost sheep. This is what God desires for you, for every single one of us. Restoration. Second thing to note, there is great joy when the sheep has been found. This is a parable about joy. Joy. Jesus communicates a religion of joy. This is at the heart of the parable. There is a giant block party. There is rejoicing. There's letting others know, hey, the sheep that was missing, I have found that sheep. Let's now throw a party. But also, we come across that once the shepherd finds that sheep, we're told that he joyfully puts the sheep on his shoulders. Joyfully. Joyfully doesn't have to be there. It could have just been, hey, the shepherd finds the sheep and then puts it on his shoulders. But Jesus says the shepherd joyfully puts it on his shoulders. There's no chastising. There's no, hey, sheep, I hope you don't do that again. Like, what are you doing out here, lost, away from the field? There's no berating of that sheep. And here's the thing about this parable. The sheep could get itself lost again. And it probably will. Who knows how many times the shepherd has gone searching for sheep number 79. In F5. I know there's no one there. I didn't want to pick on anyone because, like, all right, here's its designation. Oh, man, again? This is the 7th time this month. No, there's none of that. Here's number 3, the third thing to note. The work of restoration is still ahead of the shepherd once the sheep has been found. We're told the shepherd joyfully puts the sheep on his shoulders and then goes home. There is more work to be done. How much does a sheep weigh? About 70 to 90 pounds. I need a volunteer here this morning. Someone who does not have a weak back, preferably. Could I have a volunteer? All right, John Shue. Come on down. Now, we have no idea how far, welcome. We have no idea how far the shepherd has traveled. Could be miles, up mountains, hills, through the water. We have no idea. But the shepherd has to carry the sheep all the way home. Behind you on the floor, I have a kettlebell. I would like you to pick up that kettlebell. Now can you lift it a little bit, like up to your chest or something? Yeah, now can you walk around the theater once for us? You can put it up there, yeah, you can, This kettlebell weighs 45 pounds. A sheep. Now, John, that wasn't joyful enough, though, okay? I mean, a sheep weighs maybe double the weight that he's carrying, maybe 1.5 times the weight that he's carrying. Imagine having to carry this plus some more weight on your shoulders miles, the middle of the day. You can put it down. Let's give him a round of applause. Got his workout in this morning. You no longer have to go to the gym. You're good. What we're told in the parable, this shepherd is joyful that he found the lost sheep, but then the work of restoring the sheep back to the entire flock, it's still ahead of him, yet it is still a joyful act. And then here's the fourth thing. Oh, here, let's say this. Let's bring it to you for a moment. God sees the work of putting you back together, restoring you, healing your brokenness, forgiving your sin. God sees all of that as a joy, not a burden. Sometimes I've heard people think, well, I just don't want to burden God with what I've been through, with how broken my life is. In no way does God see you as a burden. But God sees the work of restoring you as full joy. Which brings us to our fourth note, which is all the work is on the shepherd. Sometimes we make the work about ourselves, but what has the sheep done in this parable? It got itself lost. That's it. It's wandered off. That's it. The sheep does nothing. The sheep just kind of lays there like this. The shepherd comes in, picks it up, puts it on his shoulder, and then walks home. So the work of restoration, oh, that's God's work in your life. Our part is what? Just limp, paying attention. Now in Tinkerbell, what we find is Tinkerbell, she goes off and she discovers lost things that have been washed up from the mainland. And when she finds these lost things, she is overjoyed. But these items, they are items that have been discarded, items that are useless, that have been passed over. But Tinkerbell finds joy in lost things, just like the shepherd. There's this one scene, she's flying, she notices lost things on the beach, picks them up. They are burdensome because there's a collection of a lot of different items, and then she flies away with them, filled with joy for what she can make with these lost things. It's the picture of the shepherd, the picture of God, where God sees our lives and says, I wonder what I can make of this person's life. I wonder what they can accomplish with their life. Now, let's go to movement 2, the religious response. And we're kind of walking our way back in the story a little bit. Remember the setup. You have the tax collectors, the sinners sitting at the table. The Pharisees, they're muttering. That word muttering, it has become my new favorite word, my new favorite Greek word. It is the word diagongutso. Diagongutso. You want to know what it means? This is great. An onomatopoetic term imitating the sound of cooing doves and humming bees. Want to know what that sounds like? Sound, please. Oh, I forgot to plug this in. Okay, we'll get to it. One more thing to note about this. Oh, wait, can I have the cord? Because I need to show you this. Let's do that. Where'd I put it? Oh, I did. I plugged it in. I think we're good. Ready? Okay. Here we go. The incessant drone of religious folk. You all know what that sounds like. And here's the truth. No one is paying attention. Sad reality. What about this one? Cooing of doves? I love this. Watch this video. This is how Luke is equating the religious leaders and their speech. They're droning on and on. You can't make out what they're saying. Background chatter. No one is listening. This word, it means to constantly, intensely murmur, to complain, and it's an intensified form. Heavy, heavy complaining about who Jesus is spending time with. You want to know what Luke is telling us by using this particular word? You can become lost in your religious piety. This is quite profound. You can become so focused on your own moral standing, your own self-proclaimed righteousness, your own personal salvation project, your own goodness, righteousness, your correct theology, that you actually miss out on what God is truly up to in the world. And you turn a blind eye to the hurt and the pain around you. And in the midst of that, the murmuring, the cooing, the buzzing, the heavy, heavy complaining about how we're right and everyone else is wrong, you actually can't see your own lostness. You can't discern your own need for God. Right at the end of the parable, we're told, I tell you, in the same way, there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent. This is a little jab at the religious folk, because here's the truth. There are no 99 righteous people who don't need the healing and salvation of Jesus. It doesn't exist. This is stick it in, twist it a little bit to all those muttering in the background about how right and how good they are and how wrong, wicked, sinful other people are. This is, this parable, it's a profound parable. Now, when we get to the Tinkerbell movie, Tinkerbell has all of her lost things, and then she travels back to her friends. And I need to show you what the religious response looks like according to Tinkerbell. What are you doing with that rubbish? Now, as you noticed here, this head fairy, she's not evil. She's not malicious. I think it's the same thing. The religious leaders, the Pharisees, they often get a bad reputation that they are malicious. They have evil intent. The majority of them, they're good people. They're good people. They're well-intentioned. They want to follow God. They're just missing the bigger picture. They're just so focused on what they are out to accomplish, on their own stuff, that they end up missing the larger picture of God's work in the world. They can't see value in anything that looks different than what they are used to. But they're well-intentioned, just like we see here in this video. Now, let's go to movement 3. Movement 3, the restoration and renewal of the lost sheep. Now, what is the purpose of this shepherd going out to this lost sheep? Here's the answer. To bring it home. Quite simple. Quite profound. Why did the shepherd go out there? To bring the sheep home. Rescue it from danger. Restore. To reconnect to the whole. And reconnect, I would argue, for us, to a life of purpose. One more video clip from Tinkerbell. Now, Tinkerbell makes a mess of things. She destroys all the preparations for the spring festival, for the coming of spring. But she is now tasked with fixing everything, with putting it back together, with restoring that which has been broken. What do you think she uses for this restoration project? Lost things. The things that have been discarded. The things that have been cast aside. The things that have been looked over as useless, that other people look at and say, there's no value in those things. She uses the lost things, and then she pulls others into the restoration by the using and finding of more lost things. Have all these lost things that others have said, they have no value. They can't be used for anything. But then you have a tinker who's able to see the value in every item, every object. There's a God who sees value in every single one of us. Maybe you've been discarded. Maybe you've been passed over. Maybe you've found yourself wandering away from the flock. You've gone and you've gotten yourself lost. And you think, there's no way I could ever be brought back home. There's no way that my life could have value, meaning, significance any longer. That time in my life, it's gone. It's over. But then there's this divine tinker that looks at you and says, there's value here. And you are a person who can be used to restore what's been broken around you. That's the type of life that we're all being invited into, the type of life that Jesus invites us into. It's not just sit here and watch while God goes and restores the world. It's you are being invited to be a person who partners with the Spirit of God to bring renewal and hope and healing to this world. As you find yourself being restored and put back together, you are being invited to do the same for others as well. Just like Tinkerbell went and invited other people, here's what we're going to do. We're going to find value. We're going to find the value that each person holds. And then we're going to bring them in to the work of healing that we're doing in the world, the work of healing that God is up to. We're going to listen. We're going to pay attention to see how we can be involved in this work. See, for the sheep that gets brought back home, for us, it's as if we're now being infused with new life, with new purpose. Here's a picture of a shepherd carrying a sheep. What do you notice about this sheep? He looks extremely happy. And the sheep is just sort of laying there, quite content. Have you ever tried picking up a screaming 3-year-old? Have you tried walking them through the entire store of Target? How does that work out? It's difficult. I think in life, we're a little less like this sheep oftentimes, and we're more like that kicking, tantrum-filled 3-year-old. We want to do it ourselves. Or things, the work of restoring and healing, it becomes uncomfortable for us because it takes us to places where, honestly, we don't really like to go. But God's saying, hey, if you want to experience the healing, true healing that can transform you, sometimes we have to go to those places so that you can find healing for your life and then move forward with a new purpose and infused with new meaning and joy. So how do we get ourselves found? How do we find ourselves restored back to the whole, back to our purpose, back to the God that cares and loves and is moved by compassion for us? We go limp. You let yourself be carried. Sometimes we think it's about us and what we need to do to get ourselves right. But from this parable, what we come to discover is, well, the healing, the restoring, it happens as you just let yourself be carried. Or here's another way to put it. You let yourself float. Come on. When you write a book called Learning to Float, you have to throw that into a sermon. I mean, I've discovered this in my life. Sometimes we're kicking and we're trying to get ourselves to shore. You know what they say to do? If you're caught in a riptide, you just let yourself float along the shore. Eventually the riptide will pass, and then you can work your way back to the shore. Or if you're getting rescued by a lifeguard, how's it going to work for you if you're kicking and flailing your arms in every which direction? It's not going to work out so well. You need to just go limp and allow the lifeguard to do their thing. It's the same with our relationship with God. Maybe this morning, you need to simply rest, relax, go limp, float. You need to listen and just pay attention. You've been going at it so hard for so long. You've been gripping and holding on so tightly. Today is the day to let it go. And trust that God is at work. And even if you don't feel it, trust that you are being carried on the shepherd's shoulders in this moment. So may you rest in that truth and allow yourself to be carried home.